Welcome to another episode of Smarter Podcasting with me, your host, Neil Mackay, the podcast guy. I started my first podcast in 2019 because I was bored one day and because my wife was at work and I thought I needed something to do. And so I started 7 Million Bytes, a Saigon podcast, as it was called back in 2019. It developed into a Vietnam podcast. It is now one of the top 5% podcasts in the world, the longest running English language podcast in Vietnam, and we just hit over 100,000 downloads, which sounds impressive until you hear about today's guest. So I started 7 Million Bytes podcast to help people make the best podcast possible, whether that's online or in person. And we've now worked with over 70 podcasts around the world, help produce thousands of episodes and help shows get to the top of the charts. Now, in today's episode, I am really excited to talk to somebody that I have been following and been aware of for many years. So he is not only an award-winning travel photographer, he's been to 204 countries and territories in all 7 continents. And he brings that same curiosity that he brings to travel to podcasting in his show, Everything Everywhere Daily, which I cannot believe to say this, has just recently hit over 50 million downloads. I'm really excited to share in this episode how you can grow your podcast to even more than 50 million downloads with the advice from my guest today, Gary Arndt. Gary, thank you so much for joining me on Smarter Podcasting.
Thanks for having me.
So tell me, how did you get into podcasting?
I was doing internet audio back in like the year 2000. It wasn't called podcasting at the time. It wasn't something you recorded and people downloaded. It was like live streaming. So I had Winamp, and Winamp allowed you to do live streaming, and I was playing EverQuest. And so I would play stuff and talk to my EverQuest guild as we were playing. And that was kind of the first foray into digital audio. I had a video game company. We did a series of live things called All Game Radio that I participated in. But again, it was using real audio and it was live streaming and it was live. So you couldn't get a huge audience. Podcasting, the first real podcast I did was in 2009. I was traveling around the world and I was at this meetup for travel bloggers, and I went to a bunch of them. I said, let's start a podcast. And so we started This Week in Travel. I was one of the co-hosts, and we did that for 11 years. And it was okay. I think we'd average about 25,000 downloads a month, but we never made a dime. There were 3 of us, so scheduling was always a problem. And as we like to say, it was This Week in Travel, not Every Week in Travel. And the pandemic eventually killed that. We had nothing to talk about. And we all kind of realized that it had run its course, and it was a lot of effort we got benefit out of it when we were doing it. In terms of, we keynoted conferences, we got to talk to a lot of high profile people. So there was value. But once the pandemic hit, there really was no value, and we kind of just all went our separate ways.
And I think this is the biggest question I see asked all the time, all online, and listeners to this show as well, is how do you grow your podcast? It's the number one thing that people want to know. And so that's what I want to know from you, because I know that I originally first saw you in the Grow the Show podcast Facebook group, which was an amazing podcast, which does exactly that, helps you grow your show. And I could see you posting on there and sharing your stats, and it just blew me away, because I'm interested to hear your opinion on this. And for context, the way that I look at things, you are in the top 0.00001% of shows in the world. From the stats that I see, if you get 50 downloads per episode in the first 7 days, you're in the top 50% of podcasts worldwide. And I remember I didn't know what my stats meant. I was getting at the time, and not too much different even all these years later, about 150 downloads per week per episode. And I didn't know if that was good or bad. And then I found some stats and I was like, oh, that puts me like in the top 10-20% of podcasts in the world. And then now we do 2 episodes a week, and then the back catalog's built up to over 350 episodes. So now we're getting more and more downloads per week, not just on new episodes, but across the back catalog, because it's evergreen content, which from I can see from your podcast, similar as well. And so that puts me up there. But then I see podcasts like yourself and your next level. But for those people that are starting out, for someone starting out who wants to just build that up and increase their audience, what would you advise to them in the beginning?
Most podcasts are not very good. There's no compelling reason for people to listen. That's the truth.
I got to jump in. It's a half reality, right? And I don't ever really say that because maybe I'm too nice, but that is what we try and do, is try and make good podcasts. And there's sometimes we, even recently, and I'm not going to drop any names, but I reviewed a podcast of a multi-million-dollar company, and I just assumed it was going to be good quality. And when I listened to it, you could hear people in the background. There was a light was broken and it was flashing, and I was like, kind of like what you just said. Some podcasts aren't that good, and they do get thousands of downloads.
So let me explain what's different with my show than other shows. I made a conscious decision when I launched the show to do several things. First, I do not have an interview show. There are a lot of interview shows out there. And if you have an interview show, the popularity of your show is going to be based in large part about who you are interviewing. I don't care how good of an interviewer you are. If you're just picking people off the street, no one's going to be interested in that. They're just not. And it's very difficult to get top tier people and to have an interesting conversation with them. I've been on a lot of interview shows where it's like a 30-minute conversation and it just wasn't much there. The best conversations I've had always tended to go longer, and there was a very dynamic host, and they were able to, take the conversation in different places and share different anecdotes. So I think if you're going to have an interview show, your work's cut out for you right now because there are so many interview podcasts. My show is a monologue show. I've never had a guest on my show. There's never been a voice other than me on my show, other than the very few times I've played clips. And those are like historical figures. I write a script for my show every day. Mine's a daily show. So I write a 2,000-word script every single day. Well, really, it's more like 5 days a week now, but because I do reruns, but I write that every day. And when I pitched this idea to some of my friends who were popular podcasters, they told me, like, this is a great idea, but you're insane because this is a lot of work. Well, I was in the travel industry, and in the pandemic, everything shut down. So I'm like, I got nothing but time, so why not? So a lot of my audience has told me it's like they recognize the work that goes into my show. And the fact that it's daily and it's short. My episodes are 50. I didn't realize at first just how impactful having a short show was. Again, not an interview show. Longer interview shows tend to be better. But when you're providing just straight information, doing it concisely in a short amount of time, people often consume it like candy. And I just as a joke, I started a thing called the Completionist Club for my show. And those are for people that have listened to every episode. I've had thousands of people in the Completionist Club who have come to me and said that they have listened to every episode. I am recording episode number 1,800 tonight. So if you want to know how you get to 50 million downloads, that's one way to do it. I've created something binge-worthy. All the episodes are pretty much evergreen, and it's something that I also cast a very wide net. I mean, I broke every frickin' rule in podcasting doing this. One of the things you always hear is niche down. You got to niche down and then niche down harder. My show is called Everything Everywhere. That is the anti-niche, right? It appeals to a very broad range of people. I got 11-year-olds that listen. I got truck drivers that listen. I got people at MIT that listen. I got people all over the world that listen to the show. There really is no niche. I made the show that I wish somebody else had made because nobody was making it, that I would have wanted to have listened to. So that's what I did. And I felt that I was uniquely suited to do this show. I have a pretty wide background in a lot of things. I got 5 different degrees in different subjects: math, economics, political science, geology, and geophysics. Traveled the world for 13 years, so I've been to a lot of places, and I just am very curious about a lot of things. So I felt like I was a good person to do a show like this. And so I think that at a fundamental level, those were choices that I made up front that helped make the show successful. If you were to make an equation as to what makes a show successful, part of it is time, part of it is quality, which is hard to quantify, and part of it is the number of episodes you put out. Because every episode is an opportunity for discovery, for someone to find you. By doing a daily show, I'm getting in the reps. I'm doing 7 times more than a weekly show. So I think that also helped me grow the show a lot faster than it would have if it had been a weekly show.
My brain is just pinging off in all directions there, like just wow. I absolutely love that. And it's so interesting. I feel, first of all, this podcast right now is a bit meta, and I feel a bit attacked that we're doing a 30-minute interview podcast that I do once a week. So I'm doing all the rules. It's never going to be 50 million download. When I first looked at your podcast, Everything Everywhere Daily, my first thought as somebody who's a podcast producer and advises people and coaches people was like, well, wow, it's really broad. Like, I love that you're just breaking all these rules. And then I was listening to a few episodes, and I mean, so one, the quality is crazy. You've got a great voice, by the way, as well, which does really help. You got a great voice for podcasting. But to do it daily, I was looking at all your episodes, and I was like, every single day is incredible. And I know right away, I'm like, the amount of work that has to go into that to create a new episode about history as well, because it's not like you're just getting on a microphone. I know some people who do daily podcasts and they just jump on the microphone and talk about their day, or they have a subject. But to do a scripted historical podcast every single day is just incredible. So well done.
I've gotten pretty good at it at this point. It took me quite a while to do an episode when I started, but now the whole process I could probably get done in 4 hours. So it's 8:04 p.m. where I am as we're recording. I think I'll be done by midnight and I'll be able to record it. I can usually record the episode within 20 to 30 minutes. So that's pretty normal for me.
Did you expect this level of success when you started?
Yes.
Wow.
When I started as a daily show, which meant that for at least a year and a half, I was doing this every day, even though the audience wasn't that big. And in the first episode, I put in an ad. I didn't have an advertiser, but what I did is I got affiliate accounts and I made ads for those affiliate. And I got the audience accustomed to hearing ads immediately. And I always assumed one of the other things I did that I haven't mentioned is I spent money to promote the show. I didn't have a lot of money to start, but I began spending a couple $100 advertising on podcast apps. And when you don't have a very big show, there's an enormous difference you can see in your audience by doing that. And I don't know why it is, but with podcasting, blogging, other forms of media, people want success, but they're unwilling to make any investment. They will often go on a free hosting platform. What other business, if you really want this to be a business, what business do you know of that there's zero investment? If you want to open a restaurant or a pub, can you imagine I really want to have a restaurant, but I don't want to spend any money. I just want it to happen. And that doesn't work that way. Podcasts, if you have a podcast, you are a media company. You're producing media, and what you are competing with is time. Marvel Studios is going to come out with another Avenger movie. They're going to spend $200 million on it. They're going to spend another $100 million on promotion and marketing. Why are they going to spend money on promotion and marketing for something that everybody already knows about? Because that's what you have to do. So if something like the Avengers needs to spend money on marketing, why do you think your show doesn't? When you are competing with them for the same time of, your audience. When you launch a book, when they launch a record, there's a marketing budget. They do different things. They do a tour, a promotion. The investment can be both time and money. Yet podcasters think, I'm just going to put it out there and people will discover it. And that's not how it works. Especially audio podcasts. If you're on YouTube, there's at least an algorithm, which is both good and bad. Uh, you might strike gold and something may go viral, but there's no guarantee your next video is going to go viral. So I'm working right now. I'll probably spend close to $35,000 this summer promoting my show. Now I couldn't do that when I started my show, but the show's grown to a point where if getting another million downloads a month is not easy. So for me to do that, I need to spend more and more money and reinvest it in my show to grow it. And that's just what I have to do to do that. And that's just what the players at this level who are all with big networks or companies that produce shows are doing. If you're a podcast network, it's not uncommon to spend $50,000 on the launch of a new show. And that's what you're competing against. And there's a million podcasts in Apple Podcast. Even if they're not active, they're still there. And the idea that someone's going to find yours, good luck. So that's the biggest thing. If you're willing to, the biggest thing for growth is the ability to spend money on marketing, I think, to be completely honest.
I love the honesty, and I think that is the biggest misnomer, anomaly, I can't think of the exact word, with podcasting, because I think, and I've ranted about this before, I think one of the biggest problems with podcasting are these blogs that promote it as a side hustle. You want to make some extra money, start a podcast or start a blog, or people start it because they look at successful podcasts like yourself or like Joe Rogan or whatever, these big podcasts, and they think, I want to do that. But I think what most people don't realize is the amount of work, and by work, I mean investment, that goes into that. And I think this is why it's the number one question you see asked is, how do I grow my show? It's asked all the time. How do I get more downloads? And obviously people will tell you like social media, sharing groups, because most people don't want to hear the answer. And I include myself in this. They don't want to hear the answer to spend money because it's scary.
When here's another rule I broke. You'll often hear podcast gurus say, don't quit your day job. The odds of becoming successful as a podcast. Well, my day job quit me. I had no choice. So I threw myself into this 100% and did everything I could to make it work. And if I wasn't giving this 100%, I don't know if it would have worked. And that's another thing. It's like, if this is a half-assed effort, expect a half-assed result.
And it's the same with everything. So I have a similar story, but different. I lost my job during the pandemic as well. And from there, I went through a series of back and forths. At one point, I had 8 different jobs. So I was teaching English. I actually was a stand-up comedian. I was doing comedy shows. I was running quiz nights, music nights, and doing podcasts as well. And then I started making podcasts for other people. And I actually had to make a similar decision to you. So I made a different decision that I'm going to put 100% into helping other people make podcast production, because my main show was a Vietnam podcast. It still is. It's still a hobby, but I realized that if I'm going to put, and I was like, I'm going to put 110% into one thing, that at the time, I didn't know how long I was going to be in Vietnam for. Now I still don't know, but I know I'm more wedded to the country. I'm going to be here for the foreseeable future. But at the time, I didn't know. So it didn't make sense to put 110% into a podcast about Vietnam when, one, I might not live here, and two, it's difficult to, build a podcast like that. But I'm loving that. And I think that's what people need to hear, because I think too many people start a podcast just as a side hobby, as a side hustle, as a little extra project. And that's fine. Do that if you want, but don't then be disappointed if you don't get a million downloads, because you're not putting the effort and the time and the money in to be able to achieve that. There are some podcasts that I know of that have achieved that. They started it as a little fun side project and then it blew up, but it is difficult to do that.
I've been to a couple podcast conferences. I don't think I'm ever going to another one again. And another problem I see is that people, their first thing is, I want to do a podcast. And then they just want to talk about stuff. And a lot of times it's like they want to talk about whatever it is they're doing at the moment. I just had a baby. I want to start a podcast about being a new mother. And then that's fine. But the thing is, they're not experts on the subject. They're just talking about it. And if you're just talking about it, you're not really bringing anything to the table, right? You need to be able to have some authority and expertise that you're bringing to your audience. Otherwise, again, people aren't going to care. And there's so many people that are just talking and they're not educating or entertaining, if that makes sense. And that's why I do a scripted show. I want to make, there's no chit chat. You've probably heard the podcast where there's two co-hosts. It's like, oh, how are you doing? How was your weekend? And how was this?
Hate it. I
Like, it's
hate it.
all fluff and, no one cares. Just get right to the meat. And I see that so often. Or you've probably heard this. Yeah, I want to start a podcast. What's it going to be about? Oh, I don't know yet. It's like you want a podcast, but if you don't know what it's going to be about, I mean, you kind of almost need that first. Like you need, like, I'm an accountant. I know accounting. So, oh, I should do an accounting podcast. The accounting comes first, then the podcast. And look, clearly I am a case study. There's nothing wrong against talking about everything, but I don't do it in every episode. I break it up into different episodes where one episode I'll talk about Henry VIII and another episode I'll talk about the invention of the airplane. And I'm not just rambling in every episode, kind of just, chain of thought wherever I happen to go. I try to keep it focused. So here's what you're going to get in this episode. And then if you don't like it, tomorrow is going to be something completely different and maybe you'll like that.
I still think your podcast, you could say, has a niche, which is you and what you bring to it. And you are covering a lot of different subjects, but it's in the similar format. So that's something I tell people as well, is be consistent with what you're producing. So there's another show that I know of that I love the host. He's a good guy. But his format changes so wildly all the time that I never get into it because I never know what's coming next. Like, is he going to do a bit of history? Is he going to do him and two people just doing that talking of like, what did they do this week? Are they doing about hospitality one week? And it's all over the place. I think though what it comes down to is what you're describing is what you said right in the beginning. It's about quality in making a good podcast. And there are rules not rules, but there are things that you should do to make a good podcast. And the thing you're talking about, and again, what you do really well is getting into the subject, not wasting time. Yours is a well-made podcast compared to just two or three people sitting around talking. And I laughed when you were saying that because the example I always remember, I turned on some podcast years ago, and it's so similar. I always remember this example. It's like, oh, what did you eat last night? He's like, oh, I had this 7-layer dip, and then he starts talking about this 7-layer dip that he had. And I remember I clicked on the podcast because I was interested in the topic. I can't remember what it was. I wanted to hear what it was they were going to talk about. But as soon as I pressed play, it was just them talking about this 7-layer dip that they had, and I turned it off immediately. I was like, I can't be bothered going through 10 minutes of chit chat before I get to the meat.
If it was a cooking podcast and the episode was about making 7-layer dip, that would be fine. But yeah, and this is a problem. You'd never see this on something on television where they
No,
just go off topic like this for that long. And this is something that podcasters get into.
I think it's something you can also develop as a skill over time, and everything is why you should, if you don't know exactly what you're doing, you can always get better and you do more and more episodes. And it's a shame that people give up so quickly. I just think from my own example with my show, a Vietnam podcast, it kind of started, I wanted to share, I didn't have the ideal words to say it. Right now it's sharing, not right now. The story is a Vietnam podcast shares stories of people connected to Vietnam. And in the beginning, I wanted to talk to people who lived in Saigon and know their story, but I didn't have that 10-word description nailed down at the time. And I probably did in the beginning let conversations wander off or be a bit random. Now, though, I know that every episode has to be grounded in Vietnam. We're going to talk about Vietnam. Same with this show, Smarter Podcasting. We're going to talk about podcasting. I think in the beginning, I would have easily, even right now with this interview, talking to someone like yourself, I want to know so much about your story traveling that I would have probably spent 20, 30 minutes talking about your travels before like, oh, let's now talk about podcasting. So for me anyway, I think you can get better over time and realize like, hey, you need to focus on one thing and you need to do it.
I should say when they ask for like, oh, advice, what they really want is for you to tell them that what they're doing is the right thing. They don't really want advice. And it's hard for people to take that advice and then make a change for the better, right? Because they're adamant that what they're doing is the right thing, even if they're not getting the results they want. One thing I should add, everyone knew me as a travel guy, right? I had very large followings on social media for over a decade. This is what I was doing. And that's what people knew me for. And quite frankly, a lot of people still know me for that. I made a conscious decision not to do a travel podcast. And the reason is because one of the things I learned is that people don't care about travel unless they're traveling. Unless you're going on a trip and you need to research something, it's not something we follow on a regular basis like sports, politics, technology, fashion, where something is new is happening all the time. There's not much new happening in the world of travel. The Coliseum, still there, going to be there a while. And so I always call my show travel adjacent. I get to talk about a lot of the things that I learned while traveling, but it isn't a go here, this is your flight, this is your where you eat and stuff like that. It's an educational show, which is really the reason why I was traveling. And so a lot of times, I wanted an audience that would be around every day, and I didn't think I could do that with travel. So that's why I did the show that I'm doing, as opposed to doing what you would think would be the natural thing for me would be to do a travel show.
Such a great point. When I think about my own travels, I love traveling, obviously, but I don't listen to travel podcasts or watch travel YouTube videos unless I'm going to that location. No matter how much you love it, I wouldn't do it on a daily basis. What I wanted to ask was when I first came across you on Grow the Show podcast, it's back in 2022. So it would have been, yeah, and I think you were just starting, and I remember you were regularly posting, and your growth was just incredible. And I remember you got interviewed on that show as well. I was so jealous. I was like, that's so amazing because that's such a good show. You talked a lot about using TikTok in the beginning to grow that show. And now you don't use social media at all. So how did TikTok help you in the beginning, and why have you now consciously chosen not to use social media at all?
TikTok had the best results of social media, but it wasn't saying much. The problem is conversion. And so I ended up with 17,000 followers on TikTok, and I had many videos that would get into the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of views, but it didn't result in people listening to the show. I never would, if I saw a spike in downloads or videos, it didn't correspond to a spike in the audience of the show, because somehow you need to get people from one platform over to this other platform. And that gap is huge. And when people are on TikTok, what are they doing? Video scroll, video scroll, video scroll, next thing, next thing, next thing. They're not stopping to then open up Apple Podcasts or Spotify, go to the next thing. And so I even hired a guy to do professional video shorts and everything that I put on YouTube and other platforms. And it didn't move the needle. And as I talked to other very successful podcasters with bigger shows than me, they said the same thing. Social media doesn't do anything because the algorithms are designed to keep people in that platform. Now, when you launch a show, sure, post about it on social media. Let your followers know, hey, I have a podcast. But after you've done that, they will have made their decision if they want to listen or not. And posting every episode isn't really doing anything, because either they subscribed and they'll see it, or they haven't subscribed and it doesn't matter. And that's why I think social media doesn't do anything, and it is not where you should be investing most of your time and effort. The thing that works for audio podcasting is promotion on audio podcasts. I know, without even knowing anything about your audience or the size or the demographics, I know this: 100% of them listen to podcasts. So to that extent, this is at least a group that has potential for converting into, maybe some of them might be curious and listen to my show.
Wow. What a stat that is. 100% of people that listen to this podcast listen to podcasts. I absolutely love it. And I've yet to see data that shows that people go from social media or go from the short. I post shorts. I do enjoy that, but I do it more because it's a broader brand building exercise so that we are everywhere. And I think that's the difference is if your goal is to make sure that you're seen in many different locations, then shorts are 100% important. But the conversions, you get people to go back to it. And I love how you say an audio podcast because we do. It's changed since I started in 2019. We have to clarify between an audio and a video podcast because they are very different. If you want to build your audio podcast, then you need to advertise where people listen to podcasts. And I remember learning that so early that if you advertise on Facebook, you're asking people to go to a different platform, which is asking people possibly to change their behavior because basically not everybody listens to podcasts yet. So if you're advertising on Facebook, that person sees the ad, but they don't listen to podcasts already. You're not just asking them to listen to your show. You're asking them to do something they've never done before, which companies pay millions of dollars and lots of research to be able to create behavior change. So your little ad on Facebook is going to be really difficult. But if you advertise on the audio apps, on podcasts, then you can be much more successful.
I've had YouTube, or I should say TikTok comments where people literally didn't know what to do. It's like, how do I listen to this? And the only thing they could think of is like, where's the YouTube link? And I'm just like, no, it's a podcast. You go to Apple or Spotify. It's like, what's that? I don't know what to do. So we like to think that everybody knows how to do this and then everyone listens to podcasts, and that is not true. And I should just add, if I had a YouTube channel, my approach to this would be very different because you can embed YouTube videos. It's a single link that works for everything. It's a very different type of approach that I would have. So that's just a caveat. This is for audio podcasting. That's kind of what you have to do. And I should say, not just on podcasts, but podcast apps. So I've done advertising on podcast apps as well, where it's sometimes a banner ad in the app or something like that. Still, you're talking about people who listen to podcasts.
Thank you so much for all of this information. I'm already ready. I'm ready to go do a daily podcast about podcasting now after this. I'm like, yeah. And even on my other show, a Vietnam podcast, about 6 months ago, we started a second episode to double our downloads because it was like I read it and I was like, yeah, that makes perfect sense.
That's the advice I give most weekly podcasters. And they're so afraid, like, oh, I don't know if my audience is like, and I can't think of a case where it actually got more downloads than the interview that they usually did. Because if the people are invested in you, they have no problem hearing you talk and providing your expertise, experience, and authority about whatever it is you're talking about. And you're absolutely right. The quickest way to double your numbers, double your episodes.
It seems so obvious. And since then, I've had my record-breaking months, my biggest months of downloads. I've gotten new sponsors. Everything's just gone up as well. So now on this show, Smarter Podcasting, I started off doing it weekly. Then it became too much at the time. So I went to every 2 weeks. And then I heard Adam Shively talk. And Adam Shively was like, you've got to do every week. And I was like, got to do every week. So we've been doing every week on this show now for, I don't even know now, over 6 months. And actually, just before we started talking, I checked my numbers on Buzzsprout, and last week was my biggest week ever for this show, and last month was my biggest month ever for this show. And now, after talking to you, I'm seriously going to consider doing 2 episodes a week.
So I get about 1.5 million downloads a month. That roughly, and so you might say, wow, it's a daily show. Of course, you're going to get bigger numbers. And that is true, but it's still 50,000 a day. So take that for what it's worth. I mean, yes, I do put out more episodes than most people, but
as well, quality episodes is what you put out. Gary, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. I've personally taken so much from this. I want to get you back on. I'm going to reach out to you again to talk about the next step, which is monetization, because we talked about how you grow your podcast. I think I want to know, how do you then monetize it, which I know those come hand in hand, and that's why most people want to grow, but I want to talk to you more about that. So thank you so much for this. Check out the podcast, Everything Everywhere Daily Podcast. And remember, if you want to work with 7 Million Bikes Podcast, go to 7millionbikes.com. There's a button in the top right that says talk to Neil, book a call with me, and we can figure out how we can help you make the best podcast possible. And don't forget, rate, review, subscribe. And the best thing that you can do for me is please share this podcast with someone else who either has a podcast already or wants to take theirs to the next level. So thank you very much for tuning in. And Gary, thank you for this. This has been incredible.
Thanks for having me.
You are very welcome. Cheers.